The woman's voice cut through the conference room like a blade through silk, and Trent Novak felt every muscle in his body go still. That's not fair, and you all know it. He'd been standing at the front of the room, facing down a board of directors who smelled blood in the water. His luxury automotive company had just reported a quarterly loss for the first time in 8 years, and vultures circled. Every face at that polished mahogany table wore the same expression of calculated concern, the kind that came before a coup. Trent had built Novak Motors from nothing, turning it into the most prestigious custom car manufacturer in North America, but none of that mattered when numbers turned red. Everyone had been piling on for the last 20 minutes. Questions that weren't really questions. Suggestions that were thinly veiled demands. Talk of restructuring that meant pushing him aside. And through it all, not one person had spoken up for him, not even the executives he'd personally mentored, until her. Trent's eyes snapped to the woman sitting 3 chairs down from the head of the table. Faye Sanders, his director of design operations. She'd only been with the company for 11 months, and yet she was on her feet, hands pressed flat against the table, staring down men twice her age with a fire in her dark eyes that made something tighten in his chest. The market shifted, Faye continued, her voice steady despite the way every head had turned toward her. Electric vehicles became the political football nobody predicted. The tariffs on imported batteries alone cost us millions. Trent pivoted the entire production line in 6 months, which is unheard of in this industry. Any other CEO would have let us sink while they figured out their golden parachute. Richard Brennan, the oldest board member and the loudest critic today, narrowed his eyes at Faye. "Miss Sanders, this is a board meeting. Your input, while noted, isn't welcome because I actually work here." Faye didn't sit down. If anything, she stood straighter. "You want to talk about restructuring? Fine. Let's talk about how Trent restructured our entire supply chain while maintaining every single job, or how he personally negotiated with the union to keep benefits untouched, or how our custom orders are up 32% because clients trust the Novak name." Trent should have said something. Should have thanked her or told her to stand down or anything. But he couldn't tear his eyes away from her. The way her hair fell over one shoulder, dark and catching the light. The way her jaw set with determination. The way she stood there, completely unafraid, defending him when everyone else had gone silent. "One bad quarter doesn't erase a decade of success," Faye said, and her voice softened just slightly. "It's easy to tear someone down. It takes courage to stand behind them when things get hard." The room fell quiet. Trent watched Richard's face cycle through several shades of red before the older man cleared his throat. "I think we need a recess." The board members filed out, murmuring among themselves. Trent's CFO and COO left without meeting his eyes. Within 2 minutes, the conference room emptied except for him and Faye. She was gathering her papers, and he could see the slight tremor in her hands now that the adrenaline was fading. "I'm sorry," she said, not looking at him. "I probably just made everything worse. I just couldn't sit there and listen to them act like you haven't given everything to this company. Faye." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Look at me." She did, finally, and Trent crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Up close, he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, the way her breath came a little too fast, the uncertainty creeping into her expression. "That was either the bravest or the most reckless thing anyone's done for me in years," he said. "Thank you." Her shoulders dropped slightly, relief flooding her face. "I meant every word." "I know." And he did. That was what struck him most. Faye Sanders barely knew him outside of quarterly reports and design meetings, but she'd stood up for him like she actually gave a damn. You should probably prepare for some backlash. Richard doesn't forget. I can handle Richard Brennan. The corner of her mouth lifted, just barely. I grew up with 4 older brothers. Old men who think they can intimidate me are amateur hour. Trent found himself almost smiling, which seemed impossible given the day he'd had. How have I not known this about you? Because you're the CEO of a company with 300 employees, and I'm middle management who keeps her head down and does her job. Faye tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture that struck him as disarmingly real. Or I usually keep my head down. Today was an exception. I'm glad it was. He meant it more than she could possibly know. The weight of the meeting of the last few months sat heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time in weeks he didn't feel quite so alone. Can I buy you a drink after work? It's the least I can do. Faye hesitated, and Trent could see her thinking through the implications. Boss and employee. The power dynamic, the optics. As a thank you, he added, nothing more. She studied his face for a long moment before nodding. 1 drink. There's a wine bar 3 blocks from here. 6:30, I'll be there. Faye gathered the rest of her papers and headed for the door, but she paused at the threshold. Trent, for what it's worth, I think you're a remarkable CEO. Don't let them take that from you. Then she was gone, and Trent stood alone in the conference room, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him in a way that had nothing to do with board meetings or quarterly losses. The wine bar was small and warm, tucked between a bookstore and a Thai restaurant. Trent arrived at 6:20, which was uncharacteristically early for him, but he'd spent the intervening hours unable to focus on anything else. He'd gone through the motions of damage control, taking calls from investors, reviewing projections with his CFO. But his mind kept circling back to the moment Faye had stood up for him. She arrived at exactly 6:30, wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater instead of the professional dress she'd had on earlier. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders, and she looked younger somehow, less guarded. You look surprised, Faye said as she slid into the seat across from him. Did you think I wouldn't show? I thought you might reconsider. Trent signaled the waiter. Coming to drinks with your boss after you made yourself a target in a board meeting isn't most people's idea of a good evening. Most people are boring. Faye ordered a Pinot Noir without looking at the menu, which told him she'd been here before. And I didn't make myself a target. I just said what everyone else was thinking but was too scared to admit. Is that what you think? Trent leaned forward, genuinely curious. That people agree with you. I know they do. I hear them in the hallways, in the break rooms, at the design tables. Everyone at ground level knows you're the reason we're still standing. It's just the people at the top who have short memories. Faye accepted her wine from the waiter and took a sip. They see one bad quarter and panic, but the people who work the floor, who build the cars, who talk to the clients, they know better. Trent felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for months. I've been starting to wonder if I made the wrong calls, if I should have done something different. You made the only calls you could make. Faye's voice was firm. The market changed overnight. Nobody could have predicted the battery shortage or the political mess with China. You kept us afloat when other companies went under. That's not failure, Trent. That's leadership. He looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered how he'd never noticed before. The intelligence in her eyes, the quiet strength in the set of her shoulders. The way she spoke like she actually believed what she was saying, like it wasn't just empty comfort. Tell me about yourself, he said, surprising himself. I realize today that I don't know anything about you except that you're brilliant at your job and apparently unafraid of men who could make your career difficult. Faye laughed, a real laugh that transformed her whole face. What do you want to know? Start anywhere. The 4 brothers. where you grew up, how you ended up in automotive design. Trent settled back in his chair, his own whine forgotten. I want to know who just went to bat for me in there. So she told him. Growing up in Colorado, the youngest of 5 kids and the only girl. Learning to hold her own at the dinner table, where everyone talked over each other and the loudest voice won. Falling in love with cars because her father restored classics in their garage, and she'd spent her childhood handing him tools and learning the difference between a flathead and a Hemi. Studying design at MIT, working for a competitor for 3 years before Novak Motors recruited her, Trent listened, and the more she talked, the more fascinated he became. Faye Sanders was sharp and funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard. She didn't soften herself or try to be impressive. She just was, completely and unapologetically herself. "Your turn," Faye said eventually, refilling her glass from the bottle they'd somehow ordered. "I know the official biography. Self-made millionaire, built Novak Motors from the ground up, youngest CEO in luxury automotive." But who's Trent Novak when he's not managing a crisis? Honestly, Trent ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly aware of how long it had been since anyone had asked him that question. "I'm not sure anymore. The company has been my whole life for so long that I can't remember what else there is." "That's sad." Faye said it gently without judgment, but it still hit him hard. "There has to be something. What did you do before Novak Motors consumed everything?" He thought back, sifting through memories that felt distant now. "I used to race. Nothing professional, just local tracks on weekends. The kind of stupid, reckless thing you do in your 20s when you think you're invincible. Did you ever crash?" "Once. Broke my collarbone and totaled a car I'd spent 2 years building." Trent smiled at the memory. "My mother didn't speak to me for a month, but the moment I could move my arm again, I was back at it. That's when I knew I'd never be happy doing anything else. Being around cars, building them, understanding what makes them move. It's in my blood." "I get that." Faye's expression softened. "My brothers thought I was crazy, wanting to design cars instead of just fixing them. But there's something about creating something beautiful and functional, something that can take someone anywhere they want to go. It feels important." "It is important." Trent held her gaze, and the moment stretched between them, charged with something he couldn't quite name. "You're important, Faye, what you did today. I won't forget it." She looked down at her wine, a faint color rising in her cheeks. "You would have done the same for someone on your team." "Maybe, but nobody else actually did it." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin. "That means something." They stayed until the wine bar closed at 10, talking about everything and nothing. Cars and design, and the particular challenge of working with suppliers who promised the moon and delivered pebbles. But also books and music, and the best places to get breakfast in the city. Trent couldn't remember the last time he'd had a conversation this easy, this real. When they finally stepped out onto the sidewalk, the November air bit cold, and he saw Faye shiver despite her jacket. "Let me drive you home," Trent offered. "I'm 3 blocks away, I'll walk." But she didn't move, standing there on the sidewalk looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you for tonight, for the wine and the conversation. Thank you for showing up, both times today." Trent shoved his hands in his pockets to keep from reaching for her. "Can we do this again?" Faye bit her lip, and he watched her weigh it. "The complications, the risk. I'd like that, but maybe we should be careful. People at work will think what they want to think regardless." He took a half step closer. "But I understand. We can keep this between us for now." "For now," she agreed, and then she smiled, soft and a little shy. "Good night, Trent." He watched her walk away, hands still in his pockets, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in his universe. The next few weeks moved like a fever dream. The board backed off after 2 more meetings where Trent presented revised projections and a 5-year plan that even Richard Brennan couldn't pick apart. November sales came in strong, driven by a custom order from a tech billionaire that had every automotive journalist buzzing. The company stabilized, and with it, some of the pressure lifted from Trent's shoulders. But through it all, he found his attention drifting to Faye. She was everywhere suddenly, or maybe he was just finally noticing. In design meetings, where she presented concepts with confidence and precision. In the hallway talking to the production manager, laughing at something he'd said. In the parking garage at the end of long days, climbing into her sensible sedan while he headed to his Aston Martin. They were careful. No more drinks at wine bars where colleagues might see them. But Trent found excuses to stop by her office, to ask her opinion on designs he already understood, to linger over conversations that could have been emails. And Faye, for her part, seemed to do the same. She'd bring him coffee in the morning, claiming she'd made too much at home. She'd stay late on nights when he stayed late, and they'd find themselves alone in the building, talking about everything except the growing tension between them. It was driving him crazy. "You're distracted," his sister Charlotte said over dinner one night in early December. She'd flown in from Seattle for a rare visit, and Trent had made the mistake of agreeing to meet her at their usual spot downtown. "What's going on?" "Work," Trent said automatically, then caught the look on Charlotte's face. His sister knew him too well for easy lies. "It's complicated." "It's always complicated with you," Charlotte, 3 years younger and infinitely better at relationships, studied him over her salmon. "But you have that look, the one you used to get in high school when you liked someone but were too stubborn to admit it." "I'm 33 years old, Charlotte." "I don't have a look." "You absolutely have a look. Tell me about her." Trent sighed, knowing there was no point in denying it. Charlotte would just dig until she got the truth. "She works for me, which is why it's complicated and why I'm not doing anything about it." "Since when do you let complications stop you?" Charlotte leaned forward, genuinely interested now. "You built a company from scratch, Trent. You've never been afraid of complicated. This is different. There are power dynamics, HR implications, the fact that everyone in the company already thinks I'm barely holding on after last quarter." He pushed food around his plate. "And she's incredible, Charlotte. Smart and brave and completely herself, no filters. I can't be the person who messes up her career because I can't keep my feelings in check." Charlotte was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for her. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Does she feel the same way?" "I think so. Maybe. I don't know." Trent realized how ridiculous he sounded. "We spend time together. We talk. There are moments where I think she might feel something too, but neither of us has said anything. So say something." Charlotte made it sound so simple. "Life's too short to waste time on maybe, Trent. If she's as incredible as you say, tell her. Figure out the complications together. And if it ruins everything, then at least you'll know. But what if it doesn't? What if it's the best decision you ever make?" Charlotte reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You've been alone for too long. You deserve to be happy." Trent thought about that conversation for days. He thought about it during meetings, during the company Christmas party where he watched Faye laugh with colleagues and wanted nothing more than to pull her aside and tell her everything. He thought about it on Christmas Eve when he was alone in his too large house, wondering what Faye was doing, if she was with her family in Colorado, if she ever thought about him the way he thought about her. The answer came on December 27th, when Faye knocked on his office door at 7 in the evening. Trent had been working late, as usual, reviewing contracts that didn't really need reviewing. But when he looked up and saw her standing there, still in her coat, snowflakes melting in her dark hair, his heart did something complicated in his chest. "Hi, Faye said, and her voice was breathless like she'd run up the stairs. "Is this a bad time?" "Never." Trent stood up, coming around his desk. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually, which is maybe the problem." She laughed, nervous and bright. "I'm not making sense. Can I come in?" "You're already in." But he closed the door behind her anyway, and suddenly the office felt very small, very intimate. "Talk to me, Faye." She took a breath, and he watched her gather courage, the same way she'd gathered it in that board meeting 2 months ago. "I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. Whatever this is between us. I know it's complicated, and I know all the reasons we shouldn't, but I just spent 3 days with my family listening to my mother ask when I'm going to find someone who makes me happy, and all I could think about was you." Trent felt his heart start again. "Faye, let me finish." She held up a hand, and he could see it trembling slightly. "You can say no. You can tell me this is inappropriate or that it would never work or that I'm reading everything wrong, but I had to tell you. I can't go into a new year pretending I don't think about you all the time, that I don't look for excuses to be around you, that I didn't fall completely for you the moment I decided to stand up in that meeting." The confession hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and perfect. Trent crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, and before he could second-guess himself, before he could think about complications or HR policies, or what anyone would say, he cupped Faye's face in his hands and kissed her. She made a small sound of surprise that melted into something like relief, and then she was kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. It was not a gentle kiss. It was months of tension and longing and unspoken want finally breaking free, and Trent felt like he was drowning in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Faye looked up at him with dazed eyes. "So I didn't read that wrong." "You didn't read anything wrong." Trent pressed his forehead to hers, his hand still framing her face. "I've been trying so hard to be professional, to do the right thing. But Faye, I think about you constantly. You're the first thing on my mind when I wake up and the last thing before I sleep. You're the reason I've gotten through these last few months without completely losing my mind." "Then why didn't you say something?" Her voice was soft, wondering. "Because I'm your boss, because I didn't want to put you in an impossible position." He pulled back slightly so he could see her face properly. "There are about 100 reasons why this is a terrible idea. I know." Faye's smile was radiant. "I've thought of all of them, but there's one reason that outweighs everything else." "What's that?" "I'm in love with you." She said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I'm in love with you, Trent Novak. And I think you might love me too." He did. God help him, he absolutely did. "I love you," Trent said, and the words felt right, like something clicking into place. "I'm completely in love with you, Faye Sanders, but we need to do this right. Talk to HR, make sure everything is documented and above board. I won't have anyone saying you got where you are because of me." "I'm not worried about that." But her eyes were soft with understanding. "We can do whatever you think is best, as long as at the end of it I get to be with you." "You do, absolutely." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it, starting right now. They figured it out together. Trent disclosed their relationship to HR after New Year's, following every protocol to the letter. There were forms and meetings and careful documentation to ensure everything was ethical and transparent. Some people talked, because people always talked, but most of the company seemed genuinely happy for them. Faye remained in her position, continuing to excel in ways that had nothing to do with who she was dating, and Trent made sure everyone knew it. By February, Novak Motors had fully recovered from the previous year's downturn. A partnership with a sustainable battery manufacturer pushed them ahead of competitors, and orders flooded in. The board, including Richard Brennan, had to admit that Trent had steered them through the storm better than anyone else could have. And through it all, Faye was there. Not just as his girlfriend, but as his partner in every sense. She challenged him, supported him, called him out when he was being stubborn, and celebrated every victory like it was her own. Trent had never felt so seen, so understood, so completely loved. In March, they went to Colorado so Trent could meet Faye's family. Her 4 brothers were exactly as advertised: loud, overprotective, and determined to intimidate him. But Trent had faced down hostile boards and skeptical investors. 4 Sanders brothers were practically a vacation. "You're good for her," Faye's father said late one night in the garage where it had all started for her. They were ostensibly checking the timing on a 1967 Mustang, but Trent suspected it was more about the older man sizing him up away from the chaos of the house. "She's happier than I've seen her in years. She makes me better," Trent replied honestly. "I was so focused on work that I forgot there was supposed to be more to life. She reminds me every day." "That's good." Mr. Sanders handed him a wrench. "Charlotte already approves, by the way. Your sister called my wife. They had a whole conversation about you too." Trent laughed, unsurprised. Charlotte had taken to Faye immediately, declaring her the best thing to happen to her brother in forever. "Your wife gave her permission to vet me. Apparently they decided you were acceptable. Pending final approval from the brothers, but I think you won them over with that story about the time you flipped a car on the track." He grinned. "Bunch of adrenaline junkies, all of them. I noticed." Trent tightened a bolt, settling into the comfortable rhythm of working alongside someone who understood cars as a language. "I'm going to ask her to marry me." Mr. Sanders didn't look up from the engine, but Trent saw his shoulders straighten slightly. "When?" "Soon. I'm having a ring made. Custom, because she deserves something as unique as she is." He'd been working with a jeweler for weeks, designing something that incorporated elements of automotive design, sleek lines and bold angles that would suit Faye perfectly. "I wanted you to know. I know we haven't been together that long, but I'm certain, I've never been more certain of anything. Love doesn't follow a timeline." Mr. Sanders finally looked at him, and his expression was serious. "I knew I'd marry Faye's mother after 3 weeks. Everyone said we were crazy, but 40 years later, here we are. When you know, you know." "I know," Trent said quietly. "Then you have my blessing. And fair warning, her mother's going to cry for about 3 days straight, and her brothers are going to give you endless grief, but they'll be happy for you both." Trent asked her in April, on the 1-year anniversary of the board meeting that changed everything. He'd arranged for them to have the Novak Motors facility to themselves after hours, and he led Faye through the design studio to the viewing floor where finished cars gleamed under carefully arranged lights. "What are we doing here?" Faye asked, though she was smiling, always game for whatever strange thing he planned. "I wanted to show you something." Trent guided her to the center car, a custom piece she'd been the lead designer on. Midnight blue with silver accents, a hybrid that somehow managed to be both environmentally conscious and breathtakingly beautiful. "Do you remember the first time we talked about this design?" "Of course. You said it was impossible, that the aerodynamics would never work with the battery placement I wanted." Faye ran her hand along the hood, her touch reverent. "I proved you wrong. You did, just like you proved me wrong about a lot of things." Trent came to stand beside her, taking her hand. "I used to think I had to do everything alone, that asking for help or admitting I needed someone was weakness. And then you stood up in a room full of people who wanted me gone, and you defended me when you had no reason to beyond the fact that you thought it was right." Trent. Faye's eyes were already getting bright, like she suspected where this was going. I watched you that day, and I thought you were the most remarkable person I'd ever seen. And every day since then, you've proven it over and over. You're brave and brilliant and kind, and you make me want to be better than I am. He pulled the ring box from his pocket, opening it to reveal the custom design. Faye Sanders, I love you more than I thought I could love anyone. Will you marry me? Faye's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes. Oh my God, yes. She was laughing and crying at the same time, and Trent barely got the ring on her finger before she was kissing him, wrapping her arms around his neck and holding on tight. I love you, she whispered against his mouth. I love you so much. I love you too. Trent held her close, this woman who had defended him, challenged him, loved him without reservation. Thank you for being remarkable. Thank you for watching. Faye pulled back to look at the ring, and her smile could have lit the entire facility. This is beautiful, Trent. It's perfect. They were married in September, a small ceremony in Colorado with both their families and close friends. Faye wore a simple dress that somehow made her look ethereal, and Trent couldn't take his eyes off her the entire day. When they exchanged vows, promising to support each other through whatever came next, he meant every word with an intensity that shook him. Charlotte cried, which she blamed on allergies despite it being a clear autumn day. Faye's brothers all gave speeches that managed to be both touching and embarrassing, and Mr. Sanders pulled Trent aside before the reception to shake his hand and welcome him to the family officially. Take care of her, he said, though his tone suggested he already knew Trent would. Always, Trent promised. Their honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy, driving through Tuscany in a vintage Ferrari that Trent had arranged to rent. They stayed in small hotels and ate too much pasta and made love in the afternoons when the sun streamed through ancient windows. It was perfect in the way that real life rarely was, and Trent memorized every moment. What are you thinking? Faye asked one evening as they sat on a terrace overlooking rolling hills that seemed to go on forever. That I'm happy. It was such a simple statement, but it carried the weight of everything. I didn't realize I wasn't before you. I thought I was fine, thought work was enough. But this, being here with you, actually living instead of just surviving from one crisis to the next. I'm happy, Faye. She reached across the small table to take his hand. Me too. I never imagined my life could be this good. It's going to get better. Trent squeezed her fingers. I have plans for us. Oh, really? Faye's eyes sparkled with amusement. What kind of plans? The kind that involve a house instead of an apartment, maybe in the foothills, somewhere with space for a garage where we can restore cars together. He'd been thinking about this for weeks. And eventually, if you want kids, 2 or 3 of them running around getting grease on everything. 2 or 3, Faye laughed. You've given this a lot of thought. I have. But only if you want that too. I know your career is important and I'd never ask you to give up anything. I want it. Her voice was soft, certain. All of it. The house, the garage, the kids who will probably inherit our combined stubbornness and drive everyone crazy. I want a life with you, Trent. Whatever that looks like. They flew back to reality at the end of September, tanned and relaxed and more in love than ever. Work resumed its usual pace, but everything felt different now. Better. Trent had someone to come home to, someone who understood the pressures of the industry, but also insisted they take weekends off and actually use their vacation time. In November, exactly 1 year after everything started, Novak Motors had its best quarter in company history. The board meeting was a celebration instead of an execution, and Trent couldn't help glancing at Faye, who sat in her usual spot 3 chairs down, a small smile playing on her lips. After the meeting, Richard Brennan actually apologized. I was wrong about you, he said gruffly. "About your ability to lead through a crisis. You proved me wrong, and I'm man enough to admit it. I had help." Trent's eyes found Faye again across the room. Good people who believed in the vision even when things looked bad. Richard followed his gaze and chuckled. "That wife of yours is something else. Scared the hell out of me that day." "She has that effect," Trent agreed, unable to keep the pride from his voice. That night, he and Faye celebrated at the same wine bar where they'd had their first real conversation. It had become their place, somewhere they returned to mark important moments. "To surviving year one," Faye said, raising her glass, "to many more years." Trent clinked his glass against hers. "Together." "Together," she echoed, and the promise in that word was everything. They bought the house in the foothills in February. A sprawling property with mountain views and a huge garage that made Faye's eyes light up like Christmas. Trent watched her explore every inch of it, planning where they'd put the lift and the tool benches and the cars they'd work on together, and fell in love with her all over again. "This is perfect," Faye said, standing in the middle of the empty garage, her voice echoing slightly. "We could fit at least 4 cars in here if we're strategic. 4 cars and whatever else life brings us." Trent came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking we start with that Mustang your dad has been trying to convince me to take off his hands." "He's been talking to you about the Mustang." Faye turned in his arms, delighted. "He never lets anyone touch that car. He said it should stay in the family, that maybe our kids should grow up with the same car their mother grew up with." Trent kissed her forehead. "I said yes." Faye's eyes went suspiciously bright. "You're going to make me cry in an empty garage. Sorry." He wasn't sorry at all. They moved in during March, filling the house with furniture and laughter and the kind of comfortable domesticity Trent had never thought he'd have. Faye continued to excel at Novak Motors, eventually being promoted to VP of Design, a position she'd earned entirely on merit. Trent made sure the board understood that, made sure everyone understood that Faye Sanders Novak was brilliant in her own right. And she was. Under her leadership, the design department launched 3 new models that won industry awards. She built a team that respected her, collaborated with production in ways that streamlined the entire process, and never once used her relationship with Trent as leverage for anything. "I'm proud of you," Trent told her one night in May, after she'd come home buzzing with excitement about a concept that had been approved. "Everything you've accomplished, everything you've built. You're incredible, Faye." "We're incredible," she corrected, pulling him down onto the couch beside her. "I couldn't do any of this without you supporting me, believing in me. I'll always believe in you." It was the easiest promise he'd ever made. In June, Faye told him she was pregnant. They'd been trying for a few months, hoping but not expecting it to happen so quickly. Trent felt his world tilt on its axis in the best possible way when she showed him the positive test, her hands shaking and her smile enormous. "We're having a baby," Faye said, like she couldn't quite believe it. "We're having a baby." Trent picked her up, spinning her around carefully in their kitchen. "God, Faye, we're going to be parents. Are you happy?" She asked it like there could be any doubt. "I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and excited and completely in love with you." He set her down gently, his hands going to her still flat stomach. "This is everything I didn't know I wanted." They told their families together over video calls, and the reactions were everything they'd hoped. Charlotte screamed so loud Trent had to turn down the volume. Mr. and Mrs. Sanders both cried, and her brothers immediately started arguing about who would be the best uncle. It was chaotic and perfect, and exactly what they needed. Faye worked through most of her pregnancy, only slowing down in the final month when walking became more of a waddle, and her ankles swelled so badly Her shoes didn't fit anymore. Trent worked from home as much as possible, wanting to be close in case she needed anything. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," Faye reminded him regularly, but she always said it with affection. "I know, but let me take care of you anyway." Trent had spent the last few months reading every parenting book he could find, preparing the nursery, and generally being what Faye called adorably neurotic about the whole thing. Their daughter was born in February, exactly 2 years after they'd bought the house. Faye was in labor for 14 hours, and Trent stayed by her side the entire time, letting her crush his hand and curse him out, and then immediately apologize through tears. When the doctor finally placed their daughter in Faye's arms, tiny and perfect and screaming her displeasure at the world, Trent felt something in his chest crack wide open. "She's beautiful," Faye whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "Trent, look at her." "I'm looking." His voice came out rough, choked with emotion. "She's perfect. You're perfect." They named her Grace after Faye's grandmother who had passed away the year before. Grace Sanders Novak, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, the best combination of both of them. The first few months were exhausting in ways Trent hadn't fully prepared for despite all the books. Grace slept in 2-hour increments, cried for reasons they couldn't always decipher, and required constant attention. But she also smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 2 months, and completely owned both their hearts from the first moment. Faye took maternity leave, something she'd initially resisted until Trent reminded her that taking care of herself and their daughter wasn't weakness. The company ran fine in her absence, her team stepping up to prove how well she'd trained them. And when she did return to work part-time in May, she did it on her own terms, with Trent's full support. They figured out the balance together. Some days were harder than others, juggling careers and parenthood and their relationship. But they made it work because they were a team, because they loved each other enough to communicate and compromise and remember what mattered most. Grace's first birthday party was a huge affair at their house, with both families present and half the Novak Motors executive team showing up with elaborate gifts. Trent watched Faye navigate the chaos with Grace on her hip, laughing at something Charlotte said, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for his life. "You're staring again," Faye said later that night after everyone had left and Grace was finally asleep in her crib. They were cleaning up the kitchen together, moving in the comfortable rhythm they'd developed over the years. "I like staring at you." Trent caught her around the waist, pulling her close. "Have I told you lately that I love you? You might have mentioned it once or twice." Faye's arms came up around his neck, "But I wouldn't mind hearing it again." "I love you, Faye Novak, more than I thought I could love anyone. You made my life make sense in ways I didn't know it was supposed to." He kissed her softly, thoroughly. "Thank you for defending me in that meeting. For standing up when no one else would. For being remarkable every single day since. Thank you for watching." She echoed her words from their engagement, smiling against his mouth. "For seeing me, really seeing me, and loving what you found. Always." Trent held her close, this woman who had changed everything, who had given him not just a company worth fighting for, but a life worth living. "I'll always see you, Faye, and I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful you stood up that day." They stood in their kitchen, holding each other in the quiet house while their daughter slept upstairs, and it was perfect. Not because everything was easy, but because they'd chosen each other, fought for each other, and built something real together. 5 years later, Novak Motors was the top luxury automotive manufacturer in North America. Faye was the CEO, having taken over when Trent decided to step back and focus on special projects and spending more time with their 3 children. Grace had been joined by twin boys, Carson and Marcus, who were currently 2 years old and terrorizing everyone with their boundless energy. The house in the foothills was full of noise and laughter, and the organized chaos that came with 3 kids under 5. The garage held the restored Mustang and 2 other projects they worked on together whenever they could steal time. And every day, Trent woke up next to Faye and remembered how close he'd come to losing everything before she'd stood up and reminded him what really mattered. "You ever regret it?" Faye asked one night after the kids were finally asleep, and they had a rare moment of peace on their back porch, looking out at the mountains. "Regret what?" Trent pulled her closer on the porch swing, stepping back from the CEO role. "Letting me take over. I know how much the company meant to you." She said it carefully, like she'd been thinking about it for a while. "The company still means a lot to me. But you know what means more?" He turned to look at her, this woman who was somehow even more beautiful than she'd been in that conference room 6 years ago. "Coming home to you and the kids. Coaching Grace's soccer team, building things with my hands instead of just managing from a distance, actually living the life we talked about in Italy." "You're happy?" Faye searched his face. "I'm happy." Trent kissed her temple. "And I'm proud of you. You're an incredible CEO, Faye. Better than I ever was because you actually remember there's more to life than quarterly reports. I learned from the best." She settled against him, her head on his shoulder. "Both what to do and what not to do." "Fair," he laughed quietly. "I was pretty obsessed before you. You were. But I fell in love with you anyway." Faye's voice went soft. "Do you remember what I said that day? When I stood up in the meeting, every word." Trent would never forget. "You said it takes courage to stand behind someone when things get hard." "I meant it. And you've spent every day since then proving it was the right choice." She tilted her head back to look at him. "Standing behind you is still the easiest thing I've ever done, Trent." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of 6 years of love and partnership and building a life together. When they broke apart, both smiling, Trent felt the same rush of gratitude he always did when he looked at her. "Thank you for being remarkable," he whispered. "Thank you for watching," Faye replied. And in their house, full of family and love, and everything they'd created together, Trent Novak knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because life was perfect or easy, but because he'd found someone brave enough to stand up for him when it mattered, and smart enough to keep challenging him every day after. The board meeting that had nearly ended his career had instead become the beginning of everything that mattered. And Trent would spend the rest of his life being grateful for the woman who'd stood up when everyone else stayed quiet, who'd looked at him like he was completely remarkable, and who'd loved him into becoming the man he was always meant to be.